Hello, everyone. I am Stephen Drew, your host here in the Architecture Social, and I've got a bit of an awesome special. I got an email in my inbox. I was super flattered from a company that was not close to where I am internationally around the globe, doing something that I thought was interesting in the built environment. It was quite a surprise and a compliment to receive this topic to talk about. But more importantly, I had to learn all about this company. And the more I kept learning about this company and what they do, the more they had my interest. So I am joined here by the fantastic Chris Ritter from C-90. And now C-90, Chris, as you says in your words, if you're not interesting, you're irrelevant, which I agree, and that you're a full-service creative agency and culture lab. Chris, how are you today? Are you okay?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, you see, this is a bit out of my comfort zone because normally I have architecture practices on here all the time. And because I studied architecture, and this is something that I've worked in this industry, it's very easy for me to talk about these things. Whereas C-90, you're not an architecture practice. You do things a bit outside of the box. So could you tell everyone what you do so that it's a better description than what I just did?
Absolutely. Yeah. My background is not in architecture, as you said. It's in graphic design and art. So what we do at C90 is we do brand strategy, visual identity, campaign development, and creative content. It's all very visual things.
Mm.
With the exception of strategy, there's a lot of words in that. But giving everybody a look and feel, for their brand or campaign, that's kind of our bread and butter stuff.
Amazing. And if it looks like I'm sweating here, it's because I am, because I've got no air conditioning in the room. But we're going to go on anyways. But if the beads of sweat down as much as excited as I am, it's just because it's absolutely boiling here in the UK. Well, I find that really interesting, and why I was quite keen to have this topic as well. And there's one or two projects that you've worked on in particular that I know you showcased me. But what I would love to talk about is a lot of the stuff that you do, it intersects with the built environment, isn't it? I know a lot of it is digital, but it's interesting how then the digital manifests in the physical sense and how you're creating identities for buildings, for companies, which is very architectural in a sense. So, I mean, from your point of view, this is something that you do a lot then, Chris, in terms of what C90 does. I'd love an insight into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a visual identity for, a brand is almost exactly the same as making a visual identity for a building, for instance.
Yep.
When you're doing, an identity for a building, it might be signage, it might be, standardizing typefaces or
Yep.
materials, and all these sorts of things. So, I mean, we do that sort of thing quite often. I think where the Venn diagram comes together, with
Mm,
architecture and what I do is, really building design systems.
right.
When you're, if you say that you're in branding, for example, a lot of people think that you just like sit, at your notebook and draw logos all day. When in reality, that's like 1/100th of my job.
Mm,
When we have a business, that comes to us and says, we need to tell our story, in a visual way that makes sense to people. It's actually a really complicated problem, and you need to
yeah.
be able to make, a variety of assets that tackle that, that pose a solution for that problem where, architecture is just a different set of assets.
Mm,
It's a built environment. It's, how the light hits things. It's the materials that you use and that sort of thing where, I'm working in color, I'm working in graphics,
mm.
textures, typography, layout systems and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I feel like that's where it gets to be, a lot of commonality there between the practices.
I think you're right. And there's a few architecture practices, just to reiterate what you're saying, Chris, which I see do this really well. So, Soda Studio, shout out to them actually, because their website was important. They have in house illustrators They have in-house web designers and, people that focus on graphic design. And what I've seen, Chris, is that when they do a project, that's super important as well. And so there's a visual identity there, and I think there's even a book that they give, which has the font on all this stuff. And it kind of weaves in the interior design and weaves in the architecture. And another quick example I've seen, Chris, so I'd like to get your thoughts on as well, is to do with architecture, but it's actually a developer that I seen when they were talking about the importance of the branding to do with people actually inhabiting the building. And what was what was happening, Chris, is that in this project that they hadn't quite branded it right. They hadn't got the feeling, and people weren't hiring because it was an office. They weren't reserving the floors. And so even though the architecture was kind of kick ass, because this branding piece wasn't right, no one was going for it until they kind of sat down with someone and understood this. And they said, look, you're packaging it up the wrong way. You need to think about who the person is that's inhabiting the building. And then suddenly this visual piece, once they re-engineered it, everyone reserved an office. And then it was like an overnight success, but nothing to do with the architecture per se. It was the branding and how the building spoke for itself. So I'd love to hear if any stories that you have like that, or any thoughts on what I've said there, if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that comes to mind just
Hmm.
when you say that is actually there's a building here in our town called Union Hall, and the branding for Union Hall was actually a project my partner Emmett Jones led,
Mm,
and it's a co-working space, and it's meant to be a hub for really the startup community within Cincinnati here. And what I think the visual identity did for them is it made it really look like, the hippest place to go and,
yeah.
uh, you know, hang out. You're going to meet some interesting people here. There's inspirational quotes on the wall. It's a very modern identity, although it's in an old Italianate, row house essentially. But it's a very, unique and very modern, identity befitting of, startup culture. These are people who are interested in technology. These are people who are interested in, learning new things from people. So it has to look cutting
Mm,
edge. It has to look and feel like, I'm in a space where I can, talk about things, that, there's common ground there.
yeah.
Where, it could very easily be like, any other co-working space here that's just trying to be friendly. For example,
Yeah.
it's a different vibe. This is it's a serious vibe, at this particular building. You're probably, own a startup or are involved in the startup ecosystem somehow. You might be asking for, 8 figures, to fund your business. So
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of a serious environment. You just want to make sure that it's up to the same grade of the people you're trying to attract.
Absolutely. And it's so important. Yet I can also sympathize when, because as you know, your role is really demanding, an architect's role is really demanding. They're worrying about everything stand up. They're worrying about all this stuff. But it's almost a shame for this to kind of get overlooked, because when it works really well, and I know that you've done a few projects, and I'm glad that you talked about the project that your business partner worked on. But when it's done really well, it's kind of like a no brainer. And I love that you're saying, because it's true, the logos, the branding, and it's the little things as well. Because I don't know about you, Chris, but like, it just sometimes like in the UK, and you tell me if this is the same here, but you've just got like those kind of crappy, exit signs, which are really ugly and out of place. So you've got like the really bad branding, or, you've kind of got the bad toilet logo. But if you really think about all this stuff, and if there's that visual identity, it kind of adds to this feeling of the place is detailed. It's interesting. There's, you kind of, I think where I'm going is generic stuff in and like, I don't know, like a good example as well. My mum works in the government. They'll print out stuff with Comic Sans. I mean, it's just an awful font,
Of
right? And
course.
you probably would be banned from C-90, but how important is a font that I identify it. So in the government, I think Comic Sans, and I always just do, I remember my old university used to be Helvetica everywhere, but it transcends about being just a font, and it's about the identity and all this stuff. So, I mean, can you tell me quickly, like one or two examples where you've seen it done well, going above and beyond that? I know that you've done one or two projects, and I think you sent over an awesome, for example, I thought actually, and I'm reading it here so that I get it right. So it's you sent me through the story of NMUG S&R Visual Identity, which was designing for a nurturing environment. And that's interesting. You want a nurturing environment. So how do you go about, in terms of your role, kind of helping that architecture become nurturing and having that feel then, Chris?
Right. Yes. So, what you're talking about is visual identity we did for, it's Northern Michigan University,
Right.
in their graduate studies program. So, Northern Michigan University is, it's in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And, if you don't know the geography, it is on Lake Superior. It is really cold. And they get about 150 inches of snow every year.
Right.
I don't know what that equates to in meters necessarily, but
Don't worry about it.
yeah, dumb American here, whatever. It is the type of place where you have to, be of a certain resolve to go there and study for graduate studies. And really what we found was it's a really nurturing place to go study, because you are hours drive away from a major city. You are really secluded. It's extremely rural. They're actually a rural serving institution, which is like an official title. It's kind of a new thing in the space. But what we did is we really looked at the type of person who goes to school there and chooses to do this. And the way that we kind of came up with it is there's 4 principles, that are really tried and true when it comes to somebody who goes to NMU or even a resident of Marquette, the city that the university is in. One is actually, it's a Finnish concept that they've kind of adopted called sisu, which sisu is, English translation. There's not a word that equates to it, but it's really about like having a certain resolve in the face of adversity. And in this case, it's due to being in the cold all the time, and it's almost kind of like a joke, but it's also, hey, we're tough. Right. So we made some visuals around that. We made some visuals around, another, Scandinavian concept called huga, which is really about, it's terrible outside. So let's get inside, let's get snuggly. And, for lack of a better term, get the blankets out, maybe, light some candles and look at ourselves, right? Self-betterment. So, we came up with some different symbols and, iconography that, represent that. And then, the Upper Peninsula, like I said, it's a very rural, campus. It's surrounded by pristine forest and a beautiful Great Lake.
Oh, wow.
So, pulling inspiration from that. And then the last thing, the university is really uniquely positioned, with the indigenous peoples of the Upper Peninsula, which, I could go on forever about the history of, the United States and the relations that we have with the indigenous people here. But it's a really unique thing for them to have very good relations with, with that group of people in that community. So we wanted to actually pay a lot of tribute to, the people who originally founded the area, and looked at a, art form, a traditional art form called birch bark biting, which before this project, I'd never heard of before ever, but essentially, if you could picture birch bark, it's literally, it peels off the tree like a little bit thicker than a piece of paper. What you do is you wet it, and then you can fold it, and you fold it in half, you fold it in half again, and then you fold it in half again. And what they would do traditionally to tell stories is they would take like these teeth right here, and they would bite it and bite little holes into it. And when
Right.
you unfold it, it makes this kaleidoscopic pattern. Which is like,
Oh,
it's very homey. It's very unique for the region. And that was really where we got our whole visual system, for,
yeah.
how do we start to use these icons that, worked within, the Hugon, the Sisu, and the Upper Peninsula nature. And really just started to, look at this as, how can we make it modern, but how can we also make it like really cozy and nurturing? Because that's what the people want, when they're going through
Yeah.
that experience.
I love it. And maybe what we'll do for the audio listeners and the video listeners, we'll get some of the images up, but for the audio, we'll put it as like the cover piece, the warm blanket, as you say, because I'm looking at it here and I'm spoiled for choice. Because I think it's really interesting. And the amount of work that you put into that, I think is very relatable to architecture, because while I don't practice architecture at the moment, the amount of time I would, well, especially doing in these design statements of looking in the bricks, the character, the heritage. These are all kind of common themes that pops up. And that's what I think is so special about what you do is, in essence, it's another form of the same, beautiful design. And just for anyone, of course, before we were doing this episode, Chris, we talked a little bit about, I wish that I had kind of done a bit of graphic design and so forth before. And you mentioned that you felt like you were fancy going into architecture in a formal light. So what would be awesome, because a lot on the architecture social, as well as practicing architects, I get people talking about alternative careers. And to me, I've seen people, for a good example, I know an architect who studied graphic design, who's an amazing architect, and kind of gone that way. But what I would love to know as well, have you seen people enter your industry which maybe aren't traditionally trained, or is there anything, a bit of advice you'd give to architects who are kind of interested in this area as well, that bodes really well in terms of characters in what you do and design?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I always tell everybody, and this, I had a great university experience. I even like went and I taught, at my alma mater and everything. But, I'm probably the bad alumni that says, yeah, you don't even really have to go to college, to be a graphic designer. I mean, you have to have
Right.
taste, you have to have creativity, and you really just need to have the wherewithal and the eye, for it.
Yeah.
I do think that, the basics of design is something that can be taught.
Mm.
Much like, different materials, studying them enough, you could probably get, a little bit of a knowledge as an architect, and that might be a bad example. I'm not an architect, right?
Yeah.
But I tell people constantly, if you have the interest for it, you can learn.
Yeah.
You could definitely learn. A lot of times it really takes a good mentor,
Mm.
to give you fair critique, and then make sure that you're like looking at the right things. I mean, when I'm looking for somebody to hire, for example,
Yeah.
very rarely do I look at their portfolio and say, is this polished enough? I
Mm.
more often than not say, how does this person think? And is
All
it
right. Yeah.
unique?
Yeah.
Is this, somebody who's going to bring in a different conversation than what we have right now? And that's where,
Mm.
these adjacent professions, whether it be architecture or illustration or copywriting, these types of people are invaluable, when it comes
Mhm.
to, a brainstorm or a constructive criticism session, or
Mhm.
something like that, because you have a unique perspective. And I think a lot of people in the industry who are the most successful, they normally have a weird way of getting in. I
Mm.
went to college for 2 years as a chemistry major. And,
Right. Did
and
you? That's interesting.
yeah, well, I sucked at it. So,
Don't worry. I think I did 1 year of physics class in college, and I was just like, this is not me. And then you had a similar thing. But so between us, we're two failed scientists, then, right?
yeah, there you go. It's yeah, it is kind of funny though, but the analytical nature of science is something that's stuck with me though. I mean,
Mm,
like if I talk about my style of design or like creating systems within design, it's kind of scientific, even though
yeah.
it is a creative process still. So like, having that bit of uniqueness really is, help shape who I am as a designer, and your unique backgrounds is always where it comes from.
It's very cool to hear, because the more and more we talk about this, and that's why I was really humbled when you said you'd love to kind of have a chat about this stuff, because initially when you're thinking about visual design and typology, I think you could naively think, what's that got to do with the built environment? But the more you think about it, they have such a big connection, because it's all about perception, it's all about experience. And as well, the more and more you talk about design, taste, research, so there's all the qualities that I constantly hear architecture practices looking for when they're hiring as well. So it sounds like there's so many synergies. What I was thinking as well is, I'd be curious to know, do you, I'm not too sure this happens a lot, but have you interacted with architects before, or have you found that it's more of a case of you do the best that you can with this stuff? And do you find there's much intersection with architects directly in your experience doing stuff like these awesome buildings?
Right. So, most of the time when you bring the design team in,
Yeah,
most of the architecture is already done.
it's already on its way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like,
Oh,
well, we can't really, we can't really change this.
yeah. Yeah.
One
Yeah.
one project that I can remember doing that was really influenced by the architecture is did a brand identity for a distillery near us, and it was a bourbon distillery in Newport, Kentucky.
Cool.
And they wanted it to be this super modern distillery where people tour bourbon distilleries. I live in Kentucky, work in Ohio, but I live in Kentucky, and that's a huge industry for Kentucky. But a lot of these distilleries are very traditional, old, steeped in the
Mhm.
families, and all this kind of stuff. And they're, most of the time on like pristine acres of manicured, you know, uh, estates, essentially. And this one is right in the middle of a city. It's a really fun, modern piece of architecture. And that was really what was given to us. And they said, this is what it's going to look like. So make an identity that fits. So
Very,
that was really our
yeah.
challenge. Yeah.
I think it's great that you enhance that situation. I think it would be awesome, isn't it? I'm just thinking now, for any architects out there, I think there's like a little bit of an opportunity. Almost the earlier you're brought into the process, Chris, you're kind of there to help people along, and it could be that one informs the other. And because when I start seeing, especially like now, I'm looking at some of the work, and we'll get that on screen, but you can really get a feel for things as well, because that feeling that you were talking about. I know I butchered NMU's name, but in Northern Michigan University, what you're talking about, I get a sense of identity. You get a bit of the backstory, and I think it would be cool. Maybe the architecture practices which have those teams doing the typology, the illustration, maybe they've seen a bit of a trick there, Chris. But from your perspective, would it be awesome to be involved earlier on? Do you think?
Oh, I think it would be fantastic. I mean, for the reasons that I said before, where, you get people with different backgrounds in a room, and that's where the really
Yeah.
special ideas happen. So, I mean, like you mentioned before that, your
Mm.
university was all, everything was Helvetica,
Yeah, yeah.
which, I love Helvetica. I use it all the time, but I feel like if I had to give a criticism to architects and graphic design, um, Helvetica seems like a little bit of like a fallback.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. I think the saying, if in doubt, use Helvetica, it's like, it's
It's
kind
not
of,
wrong, it's not perfect though.
yeah, it's forgettable. Nice, but forgettable.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'd love to know as well, and this is just inspiration, because there's a lot of architects that also are listening to this, and especially if anyone's done their own business, and I've set up my own business. in the last 2 years, Chris, and it's been a kind of an awesome bumpy journey. I almost don't recommend it for everyone because as a business owner, it's kind of like you're in the deep end and everything. But in essence, you set up C-90. You've got some. It sounds like from what you said, you just mentioned your business partners as well, and it's a design industry. So I'd love to know a little bit about how that come about, why you decided to maybe set up on your own, and then also how you started winning these awesome projects, which are in the built environment.
Right. So, the genesis of C90 is actually, it's a pretty interesting story. So this is my second studio that I've owned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
There you
and
go.
my business partner Emmett, the co-founder, he also owned a design firm before as well, and we were competing agencies. So
Oh, really?
yeah, we were competing agencies in town, and we just always kind of respected each other's work,
Right.
which is a pretty fun thing, to have somebody
Yeah.
in town who, I just always felt like his agency kind of pushed me to do better, and I think he would say the same thing about us.
Mm.
And I left my business after doing it for about 4.5 years, and did some independent contracting and that sort of thing. And he actually shut down his business and took a job, and
Oh, wow.
he called me up and he's like, "Hey, I got this job and it's not really going great." um and
That's
I
a hell of
think,
a way to start.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, "It's not going great. What are you up to?" I was like, I'm thinking I might get back into it." And he's like, "Let's do it." So that's kind of the genesis of it. We just said, okay, let's figure this out. And then the first thing that we wanted to do, obviously, is find a place where we could do our business. This was June 2019.
Yeah.
So just to give you a little bit of a timeline there. And we were looking around and said, "Hey, we know this bar owner, and they have some available space in the front of it.
Oh, no, you
Maybe we
started in
could
a
try that."
bar.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you survived that. That could be a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Productivity goes down, right?
Oh yeah,
Luckily it
productivity
didn't.
was not high.
Like,
Lots
we
of
gotta
food
move
trucks.
out of this bar. We gotta
Yeah.
go out of there.
And we were there, I think we were there for probably like 5 months, but we had just, we built desks, and, we had a
Yeah.
door that separated us, but it was a glass door. And,
Mhm.
we would be working, and suddenly, like about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, people start coming into the bar, and they'll just be like pressed up against the glass, like, "Oh, what are these guys doing?" And we actually stayed late there one time, to do a photo shoot, and we had just like a crowd of people just like watching us. It was a stop animation photo shoot. So it was like we were doing these little paper cars, and you have to, take a photograph every time, for every frame. So it's like we'd move it this much, take a photograph, move it this much, take a photograph. These people were just like plastered up against our window. It's like, this is terrible. We gotta get out.
I'm glad it sounds like a lot's happened since the bar then, especially when you were talking about these awesome projects. So is there, because I don't know about you, but it feels quite, I know there's like awful things happening in the world, and that's, yeah, there's certain things not cool, war in Ukraine and all this stuff. It does seem to me though, especially in the UK, in London, the architecture market's quite booming, and I get the feeling that the design market's quite booming as well. Oh, it's always quite nice to hear of, wow, there's all these things going on. There's a bit of a silver lining. So, have you got a lot of projects happening, Chris? That's one of the reasons that you've got out at the bar. Or what's it like at the moment? Are you finding it's quite busy then at the moment?
It's picking up quite a bit.
Cool.
We were, we're small, right? We only had
Yeah.
6 employees. But we have a network of people that, allow us to be able to scale to whatever project we have, of course. But, um, it, we had a very delayed, consequence, I guess, to COVID.
Right.
So we were doing great. We came out of the gate and we got a couple of really great contracts right away. They were year-long contracts, and we signed, two of them actually in February of 2020.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's right on the cusp. That is.
yeah. So, the next month, the world shut down essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
But we were fine because, we had plenty of work and, a year-long contract. So, we came through it. And then, once we got to, the end of it, our clients were not as fortunate as us. It
Right.
was like, well, I hate to tell you guys, but, this isn't getting renewed. So we actually got hit like a year later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we we had to go through some changes. We rethought a little bit about what we were doing as a business as well. Did some business modeling and said, hey, let's go about this a little bit of a different way. And now I think we're reaping the benefits of it. Where we're starting to get conversations going in the right areas. We're getting some more business. Definitely picking up quite a bit. So we've been really happy with progress in the last, say, like 9 months.
It's amazing. And I just still like while we're talking and I am listening, I'm kind of, I got to stop distracting myself because your website's really cool. It's like eye candy. But also I love the quote of, if you're not interesting, you're irrelevant. And I can understand the content because it's a busy world out there, isn't it, Chris? And I think there's so much noise online, in person. And I think it kind of goes to the theme of you on about with Helvetica, it's not enough anymore. And I think there's so much going on that I do think you have to stand out. You do have to be interesting. And that's where, again, we're looping it back to architecture because this is where it's all about. I think what you do, especially as, a creative design industry, thinking about that visual branding, that identity, it's kind of like an ace up the sleeve, right? Surely
Oh,
it's like it's an extra thing. So what's next for C-90?
well, I mean, we're growing at the moment. We're actually, for the rest of the year, we're going to be concentrating on setting up an office in New York City,
Oh, wow.
which we've done. We've done pretty well in the city. That's where a lot of our perspectives actually are.
Right.
Which for people that don't know the geography, we're about a 2-hour flight away.
Right.
Um, but we're setting up an office there, and just trying to keep the you know hit the ground running, there and get the studio set up in that location as well, mostly to serve clients. I think all the creative will definitely come out of this office here. But that's really been our charge forward this year. So, crush your fingers. I think everything's looking really nice.
That's awesome. Because I'm in London right now, and before the pandemic, the last place I went to was New York. And because I was Londoner, I was like, I've been in London for a while. I'll be fine. It's no problem. And I went to New York. Everyone was great, but New York has a different pace. New York is New York.
Oh,
I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll make friends and all this stuff. And it was lucky because I went with someone who was great fun and we met people. But that's a pace. Like New York never sleeps, right? It's its own particular beast. I mean, it's going to be quite exciting. But yeah, I mean, sure. But New York actually has its own visual identity, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of projects for you to do there, right? Because New York never sleeps. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a place where there's so much going on, and
yeah,
there's a wealth of work there. And honestly, it's the type of work that we want to do. And it's the type of
yeah,
work that we're good at doing as well. So, I mean, it's one of my favorite places in the world that I've ever been, yeah, but,
yeah.
it also is just a really great strategic fit for us as well.
It's very cool. I was when I was there, I was staying in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was really cool. I was in this area, and I gotta be really honest, Chris. I was like babe in the woods. I picked Brooklyn because it was, Manhattan was just super expensive for a few days, but then I went to Brook. It was amazing where I was at, and I was just walking down the street, and I talked to someone. And they're like, "Yeah, it's really nice now, trendy mark and stuff." He's like, "But yeah, 4 years ago, you would have got shot down here." I was like, "What do you mean?" Like,
That's
it,
absolutely
it,
true. Yep.
it moves so fast. What I was going to say is because I always find I quite like and that you've learned the hard way going on my mad adventure. There's no structure to this podcast, but that's half the fun. I always like to say to the guests on, that they can ask any questions they want, because it shouldn't be just a one-way thing, right? And I know not prepared this, but that's kind of like where it gets a bit more fun. I mean, is there anything, and it could be to do with my architecture background or anything I see in architecture at the moment, that you'd love to ask me, Chris, on the fly?
Yeah, man, I would, I'm always looking, obviously, what's the latest and greatest in design and identity, and all that kind of,
Yeah.
and that's like, specialized to me, I'm curious what, in architecture you see that's like, really getting you excited, as
Mm.
much as, the latest and greatest stuff gets me excited.
It's interesting because we've actually talked a lot about the physicalness, and I think what's on people's minds, Chris, in the architecture world, whether they love it or hate it, everyone has an opinion on it, is the metaverse, right?
Yep.
Which, yeah, which obviously I'm sure you got your finger on the pulse, and a lot of what your stuff comes in there because you can be an architect on the metaverse, but where it gets a bit wibbly wobbly. And I liked what you said, Chris, that, in terms of what you do as a creative agency, you don't really care if someone was a chef before or an architect or a graphic designer. But what's quite interesting in architecture is you study for so long to do it. You have to be qualified because there's big legal parameters in the physical world about designing a building. But in the metaverse, you don't need to be qualified. You're an architect. And so in the UK, there's like this controversial conversation about architecture in there, and you have some famous architects who really campaigning for it. Some people think it's the downfall to where the way things are going, or the servers are burning loads of fuel and we're not being sustainable. Which, okay, yes, it's true that there's huge energy going on there, but and I guess where I'm going with it, no one's quite worked out where that space is going to go. I mean, we've just seen NFTs crashed, and I was kind of experimenting with NFTs and architecture NFTs. Could you get a building in an NFT and all this crazy stuff? But I think that there's something interesting there. Maybe I'd love. Do you are you seeing that conversation? I mean, it can be fatiguing. People go off the metaverse again, but I mean, what's your thoughts about the metaverse and NFTs and all that jazz?
A couple months ago, I went to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, and uh, one of the lectures that I went to was the founder of Sandbox, and
Oh, really?
yeah, and he was super interesting. I mean, it was a fantastic, um, it was a fantastic presentation, and it was really well done, and he kind of started the conversation by surveying the audience. There's probably 750 people, in this room. He's like,
Yeah.
hey, just, quick raise of hands, like, how many of you guys have heard of the metaverse? Everybody's like, we all know. How many people are in the metaverse? And, way less people raise their hand. And he's like, how many people here are just trying to see what I'm say about the metaverse? Because you have no idea what's going on, like everybody's hand.
Yeah,
And it was such a funny thing because, all of the ideas presented were, fantastic. They made sense, and they made sense for brands, and they made sense for, why you would want to participate in it. But literally at the end of the hour long talk, the vibe of the room was just everybody's, that just happened, and it's like, it's such a foreign thing to everybody that I think, it's like the emotions around it are just really interesting because like everybody has an opinion, for sure. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to be like, jumping in and buying real estate,
yeah.
in the, in the metaverse necessarily, but it's pretty, yeah, it's pretty interesting how it goes.
Yeah, and I can see, especially the stuff that you do. And we were talking about, the visual identity of buildings. I mean, you have some stuff where who are inhabiting it, and you mentioned Sandbox. That's one metaverse, and you have all these different articulations, and then you have now like Adidas and all these buildings, those companies who want to do Coca-Cola Land, and then suddenly you got to make Coca-Cola Land work. So I think it's super interesting, but I have no idea where it will go. I have no idea. But to answer your question, that's where I think curiosity is at the moment, and it's quite a nice breather away from the how tough the world is and all this stuff going on. I was going to say, as well as that, is there any other questions that you'd like? Don't judge my website. I know it's not Helvetica, but I did pick another font, which isn't there.
I actually like your website. It's pretty good. It's
Oh, was it?
yeah.
Well, I used to be like freestone lighter during the lockdown when I just with this business started, and I was like, I'm in lockdown, and because I used to be in architecture before, and I was like, right, I've got to do something, Chris, which will make sure that I don't watch Netflix and drink booze all day. I was like, I'm on the verge of teetering into being an alcoholic on furlough. And furlough in the UK was like when your employer said, look, we can't let you work. You're going to have to stay at home. You get paid a little amount, but you're ready when we got there. So I was like, you know what? I'll put together the ideas I had for years about having somewhere to talk online and somewhere to do, and I'll do it myself. And at first it was like, yeah, brilliant. But when you're 6 months in, the website's crashing. I'm not. I fancy changing the logo. As you said, I started out in Helvetica, and I'm like, oh man, I got to do this. And I think it's been an amazing experience, but I would never recommend anyone do it. I would tell everyone to go speak to yourself or someone to do it. It's great because you learn these skills, and like yourself, as you said, I had to do a bit of graphic design. I had to think about the user interface. I've got to have the logistics of the website working. I've then got to be able to host architecture images. And then I had to learn, and we were talking about before this, about the application, which is recording this podcast and then live streaming. This is all really interesting stuff. But maybe in the future, if I had a few extra pounds in the pocket, it's okay getting an expert to do it for you,
Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I tell people, one of the things I really like to do is, anybody who, is in a situation like what you said, like, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my job and, doing my own thing. And, I think you actually put it really nicely. Like, for most people, like, I don't recommend it.
Yeah,
I just don't.
That's how I know you're a true business owner, because anyone that's done it, and it's my second business as well, and the first one was a failure, but I learned so much from it. So it's not in one sense a failure, but it's really not for the weak heart. It's you got to be strong-willed. You're going to get so much things go wrong, and in one weird way, I love it to death. It really keeps me going. I don't regret any of it. But yes, if someone says to me, should I do it? I go, no, do not.
I tell people all the time, because, if a red flag, that I always get when people are like, oh, hey, I'm starting to, think about starting my own thing. Like, oh, I read a book, or, it's just, my work environment is just so terrible. I need to leave it. Like I normally tell them, I said, hey, you know why I started a business? Because I'm 100% unhireable. There's nobody in this city that will hire me to do design, because, I think about things really differently. And that's caused me, a lot of, hustling into trying to get jobs, and things like that, where it's finally just got to a point where I was like, I guess I just need to do it by myself. And I never did it by myself. I always had partners, but, it's like, that was a driving force for me, was that I never felt like I had an opportunity to do anything else. Like, let's go and do this thing. And you made it work, so, this is my second one, as I said. And, my old studio is still running, actually. And it's been quite a ride, but yeah, it's not for the weak of heart.
I agree. I was when I was in architecture, Chris, just for me, I love the buildings, I love the people, I love the studying, but technical detailing, it wasn't for me, Chris. I just wasn't interested. And I used to be the cheeky chap in the kitchen. I would do anything not to do the task. I would take the bins out. I would speak to everyone. I would speak to the directors, I'd have one or two innocent tricks that I would be like, hey, Richard, how was your weekend with your kids? And they would just talk to me for 10 minutes. I'd be like, perfect. I don't have to do any work. But you're right. In running my own business, and you learn these things, and accountability It's because I didn't quite fit into the quote unquote box of what I thought I was going into. I kind of cut and carve a role. But the irony is that while I moved away from architecture, which is a hard job, actually running my own business, doing all this stuff is extremely hard, and I wouldn't recommend it. So what I thought was an easier route at the start, oh, I'll do something different, is fine. It actually ended out 10 million times harder. But you do learn from it. And I do think there's something amazing and a good quality. What I love about running your business is no 2 days are the same. And I imagine all the projects.
It's not boring, is it?
No, it's never a dull moment. There's not enough time in the day. But look, Chris, it's been absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed this episode. I never know where they really go. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm super thrilled that you're on. I'm going to just say to everyone, so we've been talking to C-90 Studios, but Chris, where can anyone, if from an architectural background or interested in what you do, or who knows what, if they listen to this podcast, they think I need to get in touch, where do they find you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just go to our website, c-90.com. Or, you can always email us. Our studio email is play@c90c-90.com.
I see. Even that's more interesting than mine. I think mine's hello or mail. I did the Helvetica of domains.
Well, there's a story. There's a story behind it, of course. So
Go on.
You mentioned C90 as a name. So what C90 actually is, it's a blank cassette tape. Blank cassette tape. It's actually the industry term. So we always just really like this idea of like, creating things that aren't necessarily digital, but analog, and people really enjoy those things. And a mixtape is something that, all three of the partners, we made hundreds of those growing up, of course.
Yeah.
And we decided to name our studio after it.
Brilliant. I love it. Well, and everyone, you need to go to, is it c-90.com, and that's the domain. Is it a dash, or what's it, the bit in between?
It's a
hyphen. Hyphen.
Yeah.
c-90.com. Check out that beautiful website. Chris, when I've got a few more pounds and my business is getting there, please, I might get you to look at the architecturesocial.com. But in the meantime, everyone who wants to talk to Chris about architecture, buildings, visual identities, doing creative stuff which will make you stand out in a busy, noisy world. You don't want to be bland. You don't want to be beige. Check out C90. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to end the podcast here, but stay in the studio. And thank you, everyone, who's watched us on YouTube or listened on Spotify. I really appreciate you being here. Have a good day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Take care. Hey, that was fun.